Hey everyone! Thank you so much for joining. This is amazing. I'm Aaron. I'm product marketer here at ChartMogul, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague Sid, our senior analyst. Say hello, Sid.
Hey everyone.
That's a pretty cool shirt you've got on, Sid.
Thank you. Likewise, you too.
Thank you. Yeah. If you weren't already in the know, this is your MRR. If you're a $1 million business. So FYI. Yeah. So anyway, Sid's responsible for all these awesome benchmarks that we're going to get to in a minute. But just to give you like a really brief intro, to ChartMogul, to who we are, if you're not already familiar, ChartMogul is the leading subscription analytics platform. Thousands of SaaS companies use it to calculate their MRR, their ARR, churn, ARPA, and more, and just generally make better decisions about their business. So we offer direct integrations with many, many billing platforms. You can get up and running, fast. But why are we here today? The SaaS industry is currently worth $145 billion. So there's plenty of opportunity, to be a part of it out there. But success doesn't happen overnight. And also, I'm sure top of everyone's mind, the looming economic downturn, right? So sustainable growth is, even more important than it was. And the best way to track your growth is with, SaaS Metrics, which, Sid, like, I'm really psyched about this. Like, you're going to give a really great, overview. I'll share the agenda, in a sec. So whether you're an early stage startup or you're looking for an exit maybe, or somewhere in between, you still need to know what's working and what's not in your business, and how you can improve it. So beyond that, it's also really helpful to know how you stack up against, your, other companies in the space. And, for example, like what's a good churn rate? What's a bad churn rate? What should my growth be month over month, etc. So Sid, if you want to take us to the agenda. So Sid's going to walk us through, all the basics of SaaS Metrics, and then the industry benchmarking data and the insights that he's found, which are really cool and really informative and powerful, I think. And then I'll jump back on and I'll take you through a few examples of how we can not only kind of just reach those benchmarks, but also just like crush your goals this year and then also beyond. And then, there should be a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So yeah, Sid, let's go ahead and take everybody through it.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron, for that wonderful introduction. So hey everyone, I'm Sid, and I work as a senior analyst at ChartMogul. So to kick things off, let's go through SaaS Metrics 101. The content that we are going to cover here is going to be pretty basic. So it's going to be a good from a prospective founder who's just getting started in SaaS. But I appreciate that some of you might be more advanced in your journey to understand SaaS metrics, in which case this is going to act as more of a refresher than anything new. And this is also going to help you when we discuss SaaS benchmarks afterwards. Also, we are going to record this webinar and send it to you. So don't worry on like taking screenshot of the slides or anything at all. You'll have the slides. So the first metric that we wanted to cover is MRR. So MRR, or monthly recurring revenue, is the bedrock of SaaS. And it is key to understanding everything SaaS. And as the name suggests, it's nothing too complex. It's just the combined recurring revenue that your customers pay on a monthly basis. Closely related to MRR is ARR. And what ARR stands for is annual run rate. So MRR is monthly, but ARR is annual. And how you get to ARR is simple. You just multiply your MRR by 12. One key nuance that I wanted to point out here is there are a lot of definitions of ARR that go around here. One of the other ones that go around and is popular is that ARR is annual recurring revenue. And in some cases, that is correct too. But mostly now, businesses have moved on to call ARR being annual run rate. And this is because like most companies have now shifted from a traditional annual billing cycle to more of a monthly billing cycle. Example, Zoom or Notion or Intercom have all embraced monthly billing as standard. And when you embrace monthly billing as standard, so like only 20 to 40% of your revenues come from annual contracts. So in some sense, like your actual recurring revenue is monthly and it's not annual. So it makes sense to call it annual run rate. So going back to our SaaS bucket, what we showed you was a very simplified model of customers paying you a single monthly price all over, like single monthly price across all your customers. But that's not how most businesses operate. Usually, some customers pay you more, while some customers pay you less. And this brings me to another important SaaS metric called ARPA. So ARPA is just average revenue per account, or average MRR across all your customers. It is sometimes also known as ARPU. Most B2C companies like Netflix usually tend to have lower ARPAs, while most B2B companies, for example, Snowflake or AWS, tend to have higher ARPAs. And the key insight that I wanted to share here is that most businesses, how they are structured, tends to depend a lot on their ARPA. For example, if you take Netflix, now how you subscribe to Netflix is you go onto their website and there is a self-serve motion, and you subscribe to their you subscribe on the website, pay via card, and your subscription is active. Whereas something more like Snowflake or AWS, there is a high chance that you'll interact with the salesperson, and that's the motion they have. So the way you sell, the way you service, and the way you retain all depend on your ARPA. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about growth. So growth is one of the most important SaaS metrics that investors or employees care about. Now, if you think a little more deeper into like how a business grows, you'll conclude that there are only two ways that your business can grow. The first one is to grow your number of customers that you have. So if you grow the number of paying customers, naturally your SaaS revenue increases. And the second way to grow is to grow revenue from your existing customers, or in other words, increase your ARPA. So if you retain your customers and then get them more engaged and get them to pay more, that's another way to grow. And this is true because, like, if you look at the MRR formula, you can split it into two mutually exclusive components. So MRR is made up of your ARPA on one hand, and if you multiply your ARPA with number of customers, you get your MRR. So to grow your business long term, either your ARPA needs to increase or your subscriber count needs to increase. And that's the only two ways to grow. So within a SaaS business, like it's not as always as simple as that, right? So like what stops you to grow and compound your annual recurring revenue is the SaaS leaky bucket, or also known as churn. But before we go deeper into churn, like I wanted to pause and make sure that you understand the dynamics of MRR movements. So like by dynamics of MRR movements, I just mean how money flows in and out of your recurring revenue business. So generally, a business adds MRR in three ways. The first one is when a new customer joins in and brings new business to your recurring revenue to your SaaS. The second way MRR gets added is when existing customers start to pay more, and that is what we call in SaaS terminology as expansion. And the third way you add MRR to your business is reactivation. And that's when customers who had churned previously come back to your SaaS business and they reactivate your subscription. So three ways to add MRR to your business: new business, expansion, and reactivation. And likewise, you lose MRR in two ways. The first and the major one, how you lose MRR, is definitely churn, and we talked about it a little earlier. But the other one is also contraction. So like if the usage of your SaaS comes down, so people all like there also will be contraction MRR, and that's not good for your business. In terms of like thinking holistically, like how you grow your business is like if you add more MRR, so the blue bars on the image at the right, if they add up to more than the red bars or the MRR lost, you are doing well and your business continues to grow. So that's understanding MRR movements and like something about flow of MRR into and out of your business. So now back to churn. At a high level, what is churn? So churn is the rate at which customers or revenue is leaving your SaaS business. And churn is a helpful metric because you can run experiments and can get immediate feedback compared to other cohort-based metrics such as retention that will take a while. So you can measure churn in two ways. You can look at customer churn rate, which measures the rate at which customers are leaving your SaaS business, or you can look at revenue churn rate, which measures the rate at which revenue is leaving your SaaS business. I would say it's important to look at both customer churn rate and revenue churn rate. And it is because that sometimes what happens is like a few customers make up a large portion of your revenue pool. And if they churn, usually your revenue churn rate will be higher than customer churn rate. And now within revenue churn rate, you can look at revenue churn rate in two ways. You can look at either gross MRR churn rate, or you can look at net MRR churn rate. So at a high level, gross MRR churn rate only takes into account the MRR lost. So you lose MRR, as we mentioned earlier, via both churn and contraction. Whereas now net MRR churn rate gives you a more holistic picture of churn because it takes into account both expansion and reactivation MRR from your existing subscriber base. So net MRR is more holistic. Gross MRR is just MRR lost. On the next slide, we have some formulas for churn. I'll not go into more detail, but instead would like to share two key takeaways from these formulas. So first one is that by definition, gross MRR churn would always be higher than net MRR churn. And this is because, as we mentioned, like gross MRR churn only takes into account MRR lost, while net MRR churn also takes into account MRR gained. The second key takeaway here is that net MRR churn rate can be negative. So now, if the MRR you gain from your existing subscribers via expansion and reactivation exceeds the MRR lost via churn and contraction, your net MRR churn rate will be negative. And negative churn is also called SaaS nirvana. And this is because with each passing month, your existing subscriber base becomes more and more valuable. So you don't need to spend extra marketing dollars to attract new customers because your existing subscriber base pays you more each subsequent month. So I think that's kind of brings us to the end of section 1. I know we have not covered a lot of other SaaS metrics such as lifetime value, retention, or customer acquisition cost. But I thought that's a good overview for SaaS Metrics 101. But we definitely can do a deep dive into these metrics in another session. Do reach out if that would be of interest to you. So now moving on to probably the more interesting section for some of you, we'll cover SaaS benchmarks. So we'll cover 12 key SaaS insights in this section. And these insights are based on aggregated and anonymized data from thousands of SaaS businesses that use ChartMogul. So in essence, this is real data, and you can rely upon this data as such. So the first key insight that I wanted to share with you is on growth. So if you look at the chart here, it shows you the annual growth rate by MRR bands. So on the y-axis, you can see the annual growth rate, and on the x-axis is the MRR band range. As you'll notice, growth is faster in the earlier stages, and as companies mature, growth usually slows down. So for example, if you're a startup that's just getting started and you're under like 10K or 10 to 50K MRR, your startup can, like on average, startups grow at around like 50 to 70% per annum. But as they grow past like $1 million in MRR mark or like $12 million in ARR, growth usually slows down to about 20% per annum. So in addition to the median, the next chart also shows you the 75th and the 25th percentile of growth rate. So the dark blue dot in the middle is the median, the top one is the 75th percentile, and the bottom one is the 25th percentile. And still, the chart shows you the annual growth rate split by different MRR bands. So what you'll notice here is that there is a wide dispersion in growth at different MRR bands. Some of the best companies grow faster, say about at 50% per annum, and they continue to grow at that fast pace for a long time. Whereas some other companies, growth slows down and they don't grow at all. Now, continuing on this growth trend, let's zoom in a bit into growth percentiles. And this chart shows you every fifth percentile of growth rate for all startups. And this is monthly growth now. So on the top, you have the 95th percentile of growth, while at the bottom, you have the 5th percentile of the growth. And in this chart, you can clearly see the dispersion in the growth is high when you're just starting out. But as companies find product market fit and they continue to scale, the dispersion in growth narrows down. Moving on, the next chart is probably the most interesting of the lot. This shows you the growth rate of companies split by different ARPA bands. As a reminder, ARPA is average revenue per account, and usually B2B companies have a higher ARPA, whereas B2C companies usually have a lower ARPA. Again, on the y-axis is the annual growth rate, and on the x-axis, we have the different ARPA bands. The key insight here is that companies with higher ARPA tend to grow almost 1.5 to 2 times faster compared to companies that have a lower ARPA. And you might wonder why this is the case. And there are broadly 2 reasons why this is the case. One of the reasons why this is the case is that products with higher ARPA tend to be more ingrained into your workflow. And as a business, because they are more ingrained into your workflow, you find it's harder to churn from those businesses. And the other reason why higher ARPA businesses continue to grow faster is that there is more opportunity to have expansion MRR at higher MRRs, at higher ARPAs. And we'll see some of the data on this in subsequent slides. So let's shift gears a bit and move on to churn. And this chart shows you the monthly customer churn rate split by different ARPA bands. Again, on the top is the 75th percentile, in the middle is the median, and at the bottom is the 25th percentile. So the key takeaway here is that at higher ARPAs, customers tend to churn much less compared to at lower ARPAs. So the next chart shows you, again, the monthly customer churn rate, but now split by MRR bands. Before we move on to the key takeaway from this slide, I wanted to pause and take a moment to discuss, why do customers churn at all? So why do customers churn? I think there are 2 to 3 key reasons as to why customers churn. Primary of which is that they have a poor onboarding experience. So imagine a customer signs up to your platform, they try to play with your product, but they just can't see the value of your product. So they can't get to the aha moment where they see the magic of their product. And if a customer can't get to the aha moment of your product, they'll probably churn. The second reason why customers tend to churn is because of price, and how price doesn't correlate to value. So customers might like your product and they might also like to use your product, but if they don't get as much value for their price, they try to look elsewhere and they churn. And the third and the final reason why customers churn is because of involuntary churn. So unrelated to your product, there might be things like cards expiry, or there might be failed payments. And that is another reason why customers might churn. And in terms of like one of the key takeaways from the slide that I wanted to come back to is to look at like what's a good customer churn rate. So if you look at the 25th percentile of the line, so the blue bars at the bottom, what you look at is that like a good customer churn rate is less than about 2% per month. So that's where most SaaS businesses should target in terms of like having a churn. So now the next slide shows you the gross MRR churn rate split by ARPA bands. The key takeaway is similar to the other charts that we saw. Higher the ARPA, lower is the gross MRR churn rate. But in this chart, what I wanted to highlight is look at the pink bars at the top. And like what you'll notice is that at a higher end of the range, some customers have a churn rate of about 10 to 15%. What I'll note here is that a high churn rate like 10 to 15% is deadly, and you just can't create a sustainable business with that high a churn rate. And that's because like SaaS is known for compounding. And with that kind of churn rate, you just can't compound your revenue. Also, one of the reasons like a high churn rate is unsustainable is that all the customer acquisition cost or all the marketing spend that you did to acquire new customers, like if the customers don't stay with you, all of that goes down into drain a lot sooner. So what we usually see businesses do is they tend to bring down their churn more, so perfect their like go-to-market strategy before increasing their growth spend or marketing spend as such. So where all this churn metrics get really interesting is when we look at net churn. So as a reminder, we discussed this before, but net churn gives you a more holistic picture of your existing subscriber base because it takes into account expansion and reactivation MRR in addition to contraction and churn. And we talked about earlier like how churn can be negative, and you really see that in practice here. So if you notice on the right side of the chart, what you can see is that at higher ARPAs, a lot of companies have negative churn rate. So the median company at higher ARPAs kind of has a negative churn rate as such. So it's like at higher ARPAs, negative churn is not kind of an exception, it's kind of a norm. And that's what the next chart shows us. So 51% of customers that have an ARPA of more than $500 per month, that's about like $6,000 in annual contract, tend to have negative churn. And like you might wonder why this is the case, like why companies with higher ARPA have negative churn. And the answer to that is companies with higher ARPAs tend to have more expansion revenue. So this slide shows you expansion MRR as a percentage of MRR added for companies with different ARPA bands. As you can see, higher the ARPA, greater is the contribution to expansion MRR. The story of expansion is kind of very similar at higher MRRs as well. So as a company goes big, not only does it acquire new customers, but it also expands revenue from existing customers. So like one key question, like as you think about your SaaS business and your pricing strategy, like one key question to ask yourself is whether your pricing strategy takes expansion into account. Because some of the best SaaS businesses have a very high expansion rate, And that's where a lot of growth comes from as well. The last insight that I want to leave you all with is net MRR churn rate split by different MRR bands. So we have all heard about negative churn in SaaS and how negative churn is SaaS nirvana. We have also heard how tough it is to achieve negative churn. And yes, all of that is true. But on the other hand, what I also wanted to highlight is that close to 25% of the businesses at any MRR band range have negative churn. So next time you think about your business and you think that you can't achieve negative churn, like I like to challenge that a bit and say, think again. Like if you strive for it, your business can also achieve negative churn. This brings me to the end of the insights section. So we covered a lot of that. So we covered a lot of data as a part of this section. And a lot of this data comes from the ChartMogul SaaS benchmarks report that we published about 2 weeks ago. So it's a 77-page long report. And like Aaron, if you don't mind, like could you share the link to the report in the chat section so like people can download it later? Or you can also get the report just by like Googling ChartMogul SaaS benchmarks report, and it should be the first or the second link there. So that's all for me for today. I hope you find all those insights insightful. And now I'll hand over to Aaron, who will cover the next section.
Wow, thanks, Sid. Yeah, this is really amazing. I really tremendous work you did put it, that you put in generating these benchmarks. And by the way, where did all that data come from?
So that's based on like all our like customers. So like about more than 2,000 customers use ChartMogul, and like we aggregated and anonymized that data and like did a bunch of analysis to come with those insights.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, great. So Sid, if you could go ahead and just push forward one.
Awesome. Give me a second.
Yeah, so this is really amazing. I also really appreciate what you're talking about, like striving for a net negative churn, because this is one of the things I would like to also discuss, like real kind of practical ways that companies can kind of really hit these benchmarks or even surpass them in the coming months, right? So if you're not familiar with ChartMogul, I just want to tell you a bit about how it works, right? So we provide reliable and accurate subscription metrics that help you make data-driven decisions and ultimately grow your recurring revenue. So this is how our platform works. We offer direct integrations with your billing platform. You can see here Stripe, ChargeBee, Recurly, and more. You can also build something custom if you like with our API. We take that data, we normalize it, clean it up, map it to our data model. You can see that box there in the center. And then we calculate all of those things that Sid was talking about, right? MRR, churn, ARPA, LTV, and you can also run even more, complex segmentation analyses, which we're going to get to very, very quickly. And because we're a data platform, you can also enrich this data with, say, with all kinds of custom attributes, maybe from your CRM, or like, you can also, add custom attributes via Zapier or, from your data warehouse or whatever. But then you can also send that data anywhere you like and work with it even more. So many of our customers also like to, send this clean and tidy revenue data to their, data warehouse or other SaaS tools. Maybe throw in a little data science and predict churn, for example. Or we just, released our intercom integration, so you can see your revenue data in your intercom profiles. So yeah. But getting into the segmentation analyses a bit, so like real practical steps, we can take. ChartMogul comes preloaded with dozens of filters, right? Like plan, region, currency, and like I said, you can also add, additional data. But I'm really curious to see. This is my fictional company, my fictional SaaS business, and I'm really curious to see how my different plans are performing against each other. So this is our MRR. Over the last year, but then broken down by plan. So you can see that enterprise plans are really doing well. It's pretty clear that we have product market fit, for these large companies. So in terms of strategy, right, like my team's coming to me asking me, hey, what should we do for strategy in the next quarter, in the next year? Well, I guess we should, really double down, on building out the enterprise, feature set. So going for that SOC 2, 2FA, but then also because you can see how our startup and growth plans are doing, it might be time to, reevaluate the pricing and packaging. Maybe there's kind of a misalignment between the price and then the value, it brings to our customers. So on the next slide, let's take a look at another metric, because Sid was also just talking about these benchmarks. I think, looking at overall churn rate is great, but it's more of like a binary, right? This is bad, good. Now, thanks to Sid's benchmarks, we know like kind of what an average, churn rate should be. But it's even more helpful to break it down by plan. So here, we can see straight away that our startup plans have a much higher churn rate than the enterprise plans for a lot of the reasons that Sid mentioned. You can see that it's been 5% since January this year. This is the blue line. But then in May, it was even, 6.5%. And you can see for our enterprise offering, we're actually net negative, which is absolutely crushing it. We know the benchmark, I think Sid was for this ARPA band is like 2.5, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thanks. So, and then for the startup plan, we should be aiming for around 4%, or startup benchmark ARPA band, or the ARPA band for our startup plan should be around 4%, and then we should aim for less than 2. That also sounds about right, Sid?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Great. So, I mean, there are a few reasons, why the churn rates for our startup plans could be so high. Maybe they weren't onboarded properly. They just didn't get the real value out of the product. Maybe the USPs for that startup plan just aren't as strong. Maybe that, customers can find, better value elsewhere or with another product. So either way, this is like a really good starting point for even further analysis. These segments that I've built so far are just by plan, but you can get even more granular and build them, as you like. Yeah. So moving on. So here you can analyze, groups of customers. These are our churn cohorts. Here you can analyze different groups of customers to better understand the patterns in churn and retention over time. So this is what you need to anticipate and prevent churn before it occurs. Like, we're trying to hit those benchmarks, right? So a cohort, is just a group of customers that start in the same month in the same year. And like all charts in ChartMogul, you can click on these individual cells and see, the individual MR movements that, roll up into these metrics. So you can drill down. Anyway, you can see here what's up with these. What's up with this red box or these orange and yellowy boxes, right? We can see that there's an issue in month 3, right? So I wonder what's happening, in the 3rd month of the life of our customers that are causing them to churn, right? But what can we do as a business to prevent this? So it looks like this is the time, we should be being proactive and re-engaging customers, so they don't, churn. We should maybe encourage the success team to maybe build out a cadence and address this churn before it occurs. Maybe we reevaluate our onboarding program. And just like all of the charts in ChartMogul, you can use these same filters that we were using before and look at churn cohorts, look at retention cohorts, toggle between all of the charts. You can, look at churn by plan, like we were looking at before. You can look at churn by region, churn by, marketing channel, for example, or even individual sales or success rep. And, you can also see the flip side of this and look at the retention cohorts as well. But then moving on, so LTV, is an estimate of the total subscription value of an average customer. Roughly, this is your ARPA divided by your customer churn rate. So you can see our enterprise plans. This is the nice blue line there, around 50K, growth plans around 28K, and startup plans around 4K LTV. So what's cool about this is that here we can use this chart to help plan our ad spend, because we know our marketing budget, because we know how much a customer on each of these plans will contribute overall in their lifetime. So if you have low LTVs, customers are bringing you small amounts of revenue over their lifetime, you can't really have a high customer acquisition cost. You have to have a model where your CAC is really low, where basically LTV is paying for CAC with a certain multiple on top of it, right? So the rule of thumb, I mean, you probably hear it now and again, is they say this 3-to-1, but of course this is different, for each business. Your business better than anyone, and that remaining 2/3 is your profitability. And the good news for subscription businesses, right, is that all of this revenue is predictable. It's recurring. So, it might even be possible to raise more money pretty early on, because you're actually able to draw out that curve, for your investors. And moving on. So now you know how much, you can spend to acquire a new customer. We just found out looking at our LTV, but how do you spend it, right? So here we've broken down MRR our MRR for our enterprise plan by marketing channel. So like I was saying before, you can get even more granular with your analyses. So here you can see it's enterprise by paid social, organic search, and paid search. So, here you can see that organic search is really growing. That pink line there, all of the MRR contributed to our enterprise plan for our enterprise plans from organic search, so people finding us organically. So I guess it's time that we should really double down on SEO, because this is something that's working for us, and our content marketing engine is working for us, and it's yielding the best results over time. That maybe that extra spend on paid search isn't really generating the results we hope for. So maybe it's time that we toggle back on a few of those campaigns, maybe turn them off even, and reallocate some of that spend. And this is just to give you a few ideas of what's possible. And then in the next slide, for those paid campaigns that we do leave on, we can even segment them by MRR by region, right, to determine where we should be spending that money. America, as you can see here, is by far our largest contributor to MRR, and we can drill down even further and say maybe specific countries or specific states, for example. But yeah, this is just to give you a better idea of how we can maybe achieve those benchmarks that Sid was telling us before, and what we should do about it. And really, with segmentation analyses, we know how to reach them or even crush them, right, in 2022. So next slide, please. So just in the last few minutes, we've discussed which SaaS metrics you should be keeping an eye on, how they're calculated, what the industry benchmarks are. We walked you through several concrete segmentation analyses to show you exactly what you can do to reach those goals. Really practical examples. We broke down MRR by plan, churn by plan, identified what our CAC should be because we have LTV, and how we should be spending our marketing dollar. I think this is incredibly cool, really powerful, coupled with Sid's benchmarks. Now we know what to aim for, and we know how to hit those goals. So if you're curious about even more customer stories, yeah, feel free to check out our blog. This is a quote from Tyson Quick from Instapage. And also, like, if you haven't already, like, you can, if you're just curious, yeah, feel free to reach out to our sales team. Like, I know they'd be happy to just chat with you. You can book a demo with them right here. But yeah. So really, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure for Sid and I to put this together for you. We've got 5 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Happy to answer them. Or we can give you some time back in your day.
So I think there was one question by Kev that came in.
Okay.
And that was around so they charge primarily on a per seat basis. So they charge some companies buy 50 seats, some company buy a single seat as such. So he's asking like their ARPA is usually pulled down by companies that have usually one seat, or like their metrics don't look as good like if they sell to companies that don't use their product as much. So is there any suggestion that you'll give on their pricing strategy as such?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I would really just kind of have to think it through a bit. We can definitely take the conversation offline though. Like that is a really good question. Yeah, but I think we can chat about it offline, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. I mean, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Really a pleasure having you with us today. And yeah, thank you, Sid, for putting together such awesome benchmarks.
Awesome.
Great, cool. All right, well, have a great day, everybody.